very much for that very kind and very Schumpeterian introduction. The subject we're going to look at this morning is managing the public sector in a complicated world. And first of all, I'd like to reiterate the point we just heard, that complexity in the public sector is more prevalent and more problematic than complexity in the private sector. It's more prevalent for all sorts of reasons. One is the public sector has to deal with different constituencies, very different groups of people. The people in the public sector can't sack, they can't get rid of their constituents in the way that companies can decide not to serve certain clients. They have to serve everybody. That's there. The public is quite often hostile to what they're trying to do, and quite reasonably so, since in the public sector you can tax people, you can arrest people, imprison people. So there are all sorts of checks and balances that make operations very difficult, but are actually there for the benefit of everybody. And this complexity seems to be getting worse all the time. I think the legislation which set up the American Federal Reserve was about 10 pages long. The recent Dodd-Frank legislation is about 2,000 pages long. And I speak of somebody who, for the last 15 years, has had to fill out an American income tax form, so I know what complexity can be. Also, the costs of complexity in the public sector are worse than the costs of complexity in the private sector, partly because you can't opt out of the public sector, partly because there is no discipline on the public sector in the way that there is on the private sector. The government departments can keep becoming more complicated. They don't go bankrupt. They simply keep on existing. And I think the losers from this process are the least empowered, the least educated, the most dependent citizens. These are the people who become much more disempowered and much more confused by what's going on with this growing complexity. So it's a more prevalent problem than it is in the private sector. It's a more serious problem in terms of the costs that it imposes upon ordinary people than it is in the private sector. And there are also wild cards in the public sector which there aren't in the private sector. I'm referring, of course, to the Mayor of Toronto. It seems very, very unlikely that somebody could say that I may have, say to their board of directors, say, I may have smoked crack cocaine, but it was in one of my drunken stupors. How can I be expected to remember? It's unlikely that you'd be able to keep a job. And if you looked at the news yesterday about Mr. Rob Ford, things seem to be getting worse, things seem to be getting crazier. And all I can say to our very considerable, significant and distinguished Toronto constituency at this conference, what the hell is going on over there? We have a very distinguished and very varied panel today to discuss the public sector. We have Yves Dose, who is from INSEAD, and if there were an endowed chair in public sector complexity studies, he would certainly have it. He's going to give us the broad context that we're thinking about. Then we're going to go on to a series of case studies with Sir John Eldridge, who's going to talk about, who's the chairman of Edinburgh Airport and is going to talk about Scotland. We're going to have Michael Hulsworth, who is Senior Policy Advisor to the Behavioural Insights team in the Cabinet Office, the Nudge division of the Cabinet Office. We're going to have talk from Ben Ramalingam, who's an independent consultant in the United Kingdom and has just published a book called Aid on the Edge of Chaos, Rethinking International Cooperation in a Complex World, which really could not be better timed as a book. And we're going to have Mikko Kosonen, who's the president of Sitra in Finland, which is an extremely interesting and valuable institution, who's going to give us some insights from over there. So we have a lot to get through. We're going to go through this as systematically as possible, but also at some speed. Then we're going to open it up to questions.